So this happened about 19 years ago when I lived in South China. Now I live in the US. I was around 10 years old and my best friend had invited me over to his place to hang out. He lived in one of those grey, depressing high-rises you see on TV and in movies. But this high-rise was partially abandoned, and if it wasn't for the 4 or 5 tenants still living there, I'm sure they would have demolished it. Most tenants lived on the upper floors, so most levels were dark and abandoned. Due to the poor lighting and lack of windows in the hallway, they were dim even during the day. The only light source was the square opening on the top floor that shined down through the levels. The paint in the hallways were peeling, and the air was always damp, with a hint of moisture, mold, and lead in the air. Makes sense, as it seems like they didn't really have anyone doing regular safety inspections and upkeeps. He lived on the second to top floor, so I'd assume around the 20th floor. I don't exactly remember. But we either had to take the stairs or an elevator. We mostly took the elevator since the stairs creeped us out, plus it's a lot of climbing. So we get to his apartment and play video games and whatnot. Later in the evening, he asked if I wanted to watch the new Pokemon movie, the one with Latias and Latios, I think. I said sure, and he went to get some money from his mom. Since this was early 2000s China, we got our movies from bootleg streetlight stores that sold pirated Western movies. There was one down the street from him, so we went there to buy it. On the way back, it had begun to get dark. We got to the ground floor of the high-rise, and we decided to take the elevator up. Coincidentally, he mentioned that lately, the elevator had been acting up. Like, it's been making this weird creaking sound. Had to press the up button several times to get it to move, and generally acting sluggish. I say coincidentally because the whole fucking elevator shut down halfway up. The lights went out and the elevator came to a halt with a groan. The light bulb inside the elevator went out and the thing just lost power. Now, we were two kids who were stuck in a dark elevator in the middle of the high-rise that always creeped me out. We didn't necessarily panic right away, we just started yelling for help. This was before the time of cell phones, so we just hoped some tenant would hear us. That's when we saw it. My buddy suddenly stopped yelling and tapped him on my shoulder to look up. I did. There was a vent with an opening that you could see through, where you could see up the elevator shaft. Since it was late evening, we could partially see up the shaft from what little light shone through the hallways. It was looking down at us from the shaft. It looked like a hybrid between a mandrill and an old lady. Like, the human features were super distinct. It had stripes underneath its eyes, bald head with hairs on the side, sharp teeth, long nose, and very imposing eyes. I drew a picture for y'all's reference below. It was completely silent and just looking down at us, like it was stalking us. There was 5 seconds of silence where we tried to process what we were seeing, before realizing we had never seen anything like it before. Then we went into complete panic. I think I experienced my first panic attack in that elevator. We started yelling at the top of our lungs, and every time I would look up, it would still be there, looking down. We'd slam our fists on the buttons, kick the door and all, but it was just looking down at us, quietly. I'd try my best to not look at it, hoping it would go away or it was just my imagination. I'd look away for 20 seconds, but curiosity would cause me to look back up at it again. It would still be there. I think we were there for about 3 or 4 minutes, and I'll be honest, I soiled myself. Eventually, we heard someone yell something and 30 seconds later, the power came back on. I think the landlord heard us. The elevator started moving again, and once the elevator light came on, the thing was gone. We get back to his apartment, a complete mess, and his mom had to help me change. We eventually cleaned up and she put the movie we just got to calm us down. I was too terrified to focus. Halfway through the movie, my buddy mentioned that he'd hear stuff in the hallways at night, like someone rummaging or scratching, but he never really thought much of it. His parents had mentioned to him not to play in the abandoned floors, but we just assumed since we were kids and those were unsupervised areas. I eventually had his dad walk me down the stairs and take me home. After that day, I refused to go there and would just have him come over to my place. My place didn't have the best toys, but holy shit, it didn't also have a fucking demented mandrill woman hybrid wanting to eat my soul. It happens almost every time, every day, at random times, but only when I'm alone at home. This began mostly being noticeable several months ago. TVs come on in different rooms that I'm in. I have a knee jerk reaction to look behind me or check doorways constantly over and over again because I'm absolutely convinced of the presence of other people around me. I get a static feeling lingering in the air and goosebumps up and down my arms. Sometimes I get tapped or poked. I hear things falling or being moved or opened, for example, the kitchen, and even came home to my huge dresser upside down with all three drawers pulled out and their contents emptied. I had a headache and wanted ibuprofen. I was in the middle of a League of Legends grind day. I couldn't find the ibuprofen. I got mad and turned back on my gaming computer and put on my headset. I was hit in the back of the head with an Alev bottle. I literally laugh about this one all the time, actually. What the actual fuck? Sometimes I would hear something. I've been answered with several things. 4 main vocal disturbances in my life have shocked me to my core. My very first one was in my childhood home. I was awoken around 4 a.m. as a young girl by hearing the voice of a young boy quietly, innocently go, "Hello?" Never again I experienced anything quite like that until now, nor spoke about it. The next 3 are all from the past few months. I saw a large shadow pass over my curtain on my window, and I shouted, "Who are you?" And a man's voice, younger but not old, 30s maybe, answered, "You can hear me?" Then he vanished. I did not reply. I sat in my bedroom speaking to my dogs. I do this a lot. I purchased a new book off Amazon. I was opening the box on my floor. I said, "Honestly, haven't read in years. I'm very excited for it." A woman, older, gravelly voice, but not croaky, more delicate, whispered, "That's great, my name." As I jumped up, extremely frightened, I heard again, "No, please, tell me more." The voice came from the hallway. I grabbed my keys and ran out my door and left. I never shook the energy off me the entire day. The last one is the most haunting one. I awoke for only the second time in my 22 years of life to someone awaking me. This time, a male scream. It was lengthy and drawn out. It came and rattled from the gut. It was core-breaking. It was extremely loud and physically audible. It did not feel manifested from my mind. It ripped me from the dream I was coherently having and remembering at the time. I had absolutely nothing to do with it either. It was a dream in the universe of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, one of my favourites. I like tunes. The directional sound waves came from underneath me actually, almost as if rising from beneath my pillow, upward, through my body and towards the ceiling. Here are some other things I'm realising. My brand new phone loses full charge in 2 hours, maybe less. There are suddenly more pests or bugs, mainly flies and gnats, and this has never been an issue before in my 4 years of living alone in the same place. I'm having bad sleep paralysis at night. I've developed a strange paranoia of open doorways. All doors must be shut. Things go missing in the spot where I set them down and then later reappear only after I get far, far too frustrated. I feel a weird sense of protection from both my dogs. I keep them both in the one room I usually am in for the day, with me to closely monitor the sounds and make sure they are not coming from upstairs or from them messing about on their own, but I am on the basement floor. One of my dogs is severely disabled. I don't know why I feel protection radiating from her, perhaps because she has the most beautiful soul of an animal. I'm convinced paranormal activity stays outside of the room she is in. This is also why I know if I see something destroyed, it's kinda hard to blame a paralyzed dog about it. I do have a Ouija board that I used once, but otherwise purchased because it was an original 1963, or some sort, 1960 something, from a private seller at an auction. I purchased it 3 years ago. I never had any problems. I don't think it is related. I did have one incident that never followed up or became anything else. These experiences are all manifesting from early this year. I don't really believe in the paranormal. Until now. When I was little, like ages 3 to 4, I had an imaginary friend. We lived in a double wide on a small property on Vancouver Island, Canada. It was a small little town and you had to take a ferry to get to the mainland. The property we lived on was owned by someone else who also lived on the property, but their house wasn't really near ours. I don't remember a whole lot about the property because I was so young, but this is just to give a general idea of it. We had our double wide, 2 greenhouses, and a large garden. I remember spending a lot of time in the garden with my mom, specifically the purple lettuce and rainbow carrots we grew. My mom tells me about my imaginary friend I called the Red Man. I don't know why I called him that, as I don't remember what he looked like. When I think back to it, I remember a red silhouette of a tall man, and that's about it. My mom didn't think much of the Red Man at first, as I had an active imagination and this was just a new friend. The Red Man and I would have tea parties together, build forts and colour together. General little kids things. This went on for about a month or so, until one day my mom told me that the Red Man wasn't real. He was just my imaginary friend. Later that day while she was in the garden, she was bent down pulling out a weed and she was suddenly knocked over. She thought it was my dad as she felt hands on her back and she was shoved down. She turned around to see no one there. She ran into the house and my dad was sitting on the couch. While she was telling my dad about this, I came into the living room and told her that it wasn't him, it was the Red Man. He was angry with her for saying he wasn't real. I don't remember if anything else really happened, but the Red Man and I continued to have our tea parties like nothing happened. Fast forward a few months and we get invited to the property owner's house. Don't remember why, all I know is we were there for some reason. While we were being shown the house, I noticed a picture of a man on the wall. I stopped, pointed to him and said, "Mommy, that's the Red Man." She asked me what I meant and I just repeated, "That's the Red Man." A few years later, my mom tells me about how the man in the picture was the owner's brother, who lived in the double wide before us. He died in a plane crash a year before we moved in. It was 2014. I was 14, I'm 21 now, and spent most of my time at the park. I was, and still am, an emo kid and was really struggling with my mental health and hated being at home, so I would spend all day and all night at the park drawing and smoking cigarettes I'd stolen from my older sister. I live in a small beach town in the Pacific Northwest, and off to the side of the park there was a trail that led to the bay, where I liked to sit and draw, or just watch the tide come in from a large rock. The park itself was a very large field, with a baseball field in the front, and then the park was towards the back, surrounded by trees. There was one streetlight at the end of the road. Off to one side, there was a road that led to a few houses behind the park, and there was lots of trails you could take through the wooded area that would either lead to someone's property or take you back to the park. There was a large undercover area that was split down the middle with a wall, both sides having picnic tables and a counter with a sink, and bathrooms at the back of the building. There was a sort of hallway that led from the back where you couldn't see someone coming until they were in the front picnic area. This hallway ties in later. A few months before the incident, I was sitting on a swing scribbling away in a notebook with my headphones in when a man showed up. He looked homeless, his clothes and face were dirty, and he had shoulder-length hair and a scruffy beard. I'd had a few encounters with weirdos at the park, and I just ignored them. I always carried a pocket knife on me just in case anyone ever tried anything, but luckily never had to use it. The man sits down at a bench and just watches me for about 10 minutes or so. I continued to ignore him, kept my headphones in, but paused my music because I noticed he was speaking. He was sort of just mumbling to himself, and I couldn't really make out the words until he stood up and walked over to me. I looked up at him, and he started talking. He told me that I needed protected from the monsters in the town. The monsters here like pretty young girls like myself, and he was sent here to protect them. My first thought was, okay, so this dude is high as fuck, and I should probably go. But before I could even get out of the swing, he turned around and walked away. I never saw him again, and just thought he was a drug addict, as there's a lot of them in my town. Now, onto the incident. This happened a couple of weeks after my encounter with the strange man. It was about 3 in the morning and I was sitting up on the counter in the undercover area. The only light source came from above me, and the single streetlight on the other side of the park, so the majority of the field was dark. I did this often, as I liked being alone at night and had never had any bad experiences being there that late. I looked up from my drawing and noticed what looked like a large white dog run under the street lamp. Didn't think much of it as I knew the people who lived across the street had a large white dog. I continued looking, hoping to see the dog again. I couldn't make anything out in the dark, when suddenly I see the same thing run across the same field and up into the woods in a matter of seconds. Time seemed to slow down as I watched this creature. I realized it was not a dog, as it had no fur, and something about it almost looked human. The way its body moved just didn't look right. I couldn't make out any features because of how quickly it ran. I froze, I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I felt sick to my stomach and my mind was screaming at me to run. So I did. I grabbed my bag, shoved my sketchbook inside and ran as fast as I could, constantly checking behind me to see if the creature was following. I didn't stop running until I was on my front porch. I didn't go back to the park for some time after that, and when I did go back, I always left way before the sunset. My brother and I have some theories about this creature. We're not sure what the hell it was, and I'd love to hear if anyone has any ideas. We were talking about this a while back, and he mentioned that it might have been circling me. The spot in the woods that the creature disappeared into had a trail that came out behind the park, and the back of the building was just a few steps away from the exit. He thinks it had spotted me and wanted to sneak up from behind through the little hallway area to catch me off guard. I'd never thought about that, and it makes me anxious to think about. I always thought the creature didn't even see me there and was just out for a run or something. It's honestly so scary to think that if I wouldn't have run at that moment, I might not be here to post this. As for the weird man, my brother thinks that he actually was sent to protect me, and that he was a warning sign that I'd missed. We're not religious, so I wouldn't say he was sent from God or anything, but it definitely is strange, even if it is just a coincidence. The house I used to live in was in a rural area. It was an older house built in the 60s. There were about 6 acres of land on the property, and it was near the end of a dirt road neighbourhood. That's what I called it. Pretty much there were 6 houses on a relatively long dirt road. The house I lived in was second to last on the dirt road. Only 2 other houses in the neighbourhood were occupied at the time we moved in. I was about 7 at the time. I remember being really excited at first because I was dreaming about getting all these different animals. And we did eventually get cats, dogs, chickens and goats. After about a month, I decided I was finally brave enough to explore the area around the house. There was an old dilapidated chicken coop near the front of the property next to a patch of woods. My stepfather was in the process of rebuilding it. I remember trying to enter the woods near the chicken coop and it felt wrong. That's the only way I could describe it. It just felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to be there, so I left. I would only realize years later that was just the first experience. Within the first 6 months of living there, I begged my parents for a pair of curtains for my room. My room was facing the backyard and the greater wooded area, and I constantly felt like I was being watched, and I hated it. I was in near hysterics about it until they finally got me curtains, and that only provided a bit of comfort. As the years went on, I knew something was wrong with that house and the area around it. I knew there were places on that land I shouldn't go and I should avoid. I used to have dreams looking back on it. I believe it was sleep paralysis, but as a child I just put them off as weird, creepy dreams. I also had a night terror once, and it was probably one of the worst nights of my life and the worst personal experience I had at that house. There were shadows everywhere and they were yelling over each other and I couldn't understand them. I was screaming for my parents until my voice went out and I couldn't speak anymore. No one heard me. It fucked me up for a long time. I still experienced other things. There was a crawl space behind my closet and I would hear things moving around and making noises inside of it occasionally. I tried to ignore it. And there was a constant presence in my room and the next room to mine. Sometimes it got so overwhelming, I couldn't stand to be in that room and I had to go sleep with my parents in our living room. And then there were a couple times I heard weird noises during the night when I was staying up watching TV. It sounded like coyotes, but distorted and just wrong. That's just the closest sound I can compare it to. I think I know what it was, but I won't say its name. And then there was the thing I was most terrified of, and it was why I always avoided the entrance to the attic, because there was a thing in the attic, an awful thing. I never saw it and never heard it, thank God I didn't. But just walking past or near the entrance to the attic would make me terrified, sick, and uneasy. None of the animals would go near or past it either. After my parents divorced, my mom and I left the house, and I'm glad we did, because according to my mother's ex-husband, it got a lot worse. But that's not my experience to share. I honestly just chalked it all up to me being an anxious kid until recently, when I was talking to my mother's ex-husband, who recently moved out of that house. I've known that man my entire life, and I have never seen or heard him so terrified. Even my mother has experienced things in that house, and she doesn't believe in the paranormal. Ever since I could speak, I would always threaten to kill myself somehow. Yeah, everyone does it, but I can imagine being a mother and having your 4-year-old daughter threaten to lay in the road so a car will hit her is terrifying. Anyways, that was constant until I was about 6, and it just stopped. Suddenly, my older sister started doing the same. I grew up in a very hippie family, and my mom was convinced we were possessed. My mom took my sister to a hippie doctor a couple years later, and my sister stopped it and moved back to me, I suppose. It stayed with me from 11 to 14, keep in mind. My parents were divorced for many years, and my dad lived in the mountains. His house was online on top of the mountain with no other houses around, and was also a canyon where many people died immigrating through it. Already creepy enough. After my sister got somewhat exercised and whatever it was moved back to me, I had sleep paralysis only at my dad's house. I didn't know that it was sleep paralysis at first. I thought I was just dreaming, but I did some research and found out it was pretty common. I remember I had this black IKEA dresser in the corner of my room that turned into a tall figure. I could only see it out the side of my eye every night though. I never told anyone about it until I was 13, and I was so terrified of going to my dad's house, so I went to my mom. I was honestly surprised she believed me, but then again, she was a hippie who believed in all kinds of stuff. A week after I told her, she took me out of school that day to take me to the doctors. When we got there, it wasn't actually the doctors, it was the hippie doctor. My mum was so convinced that we were possessed by something, and obviously being 13, that scared the shit out of me. We got in there and I laid on a table. He told me to close my eyes and rest. He tried to communicate with my subconscious through my arm, but I felt stupid and that it was bullshit. He decided that he would communicate through my mom using my energy. I held my mom's hand as she took my spot on the table and closed her eyes. He began to ask her questions and remember her twitching and somewhat convulsing with every question, which made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. At the end of the appointment, he looks at me and tells me that my sleep paralysis is protecting me. That the thing I see out of the corner of my eye isn't a demon, but it's a part of me assuring me that I'm safe. And honestly, that made sense to me. I had a lot of weird experiences at my dad's house that terrified me. Same with all my siblings too, they've all seen things. I have 2 half-brothers who are 4 and 5 living there all the time, and I tell them ghosts don't exist and such. One time the younger one was talking to the wall, showing a Lego set that he had built. I asked, "Who's that for?" And he pointed to the corner where he was standing and said, "Madeline." I didn't think anything of that. A couple months later, I was sitting with the older one on the couch, and I was messing with him. I asked, "Do you have a girlfriend?" He nodded his head. "What's her name?" I continued. He pointed to the same corner and said, "Madeline." And that was very strange, but as long as they're not sketched out, I won't be either. Anyways, back to the original story. After he told me I was safe, he made me leave the room and talk to my mom for around half an hour. She refused to tell me what he told her. All she told me was it was about my past life. I decided to stop trying to get it out of her and just forget it. My mom had me drop off at school. That night I went to a friend's house for a sleepover. She lived in the same canyon as my dad, but closer to the city than him. Her house still terrified me. We were watching a movie and I went to go take off my jewellery in a bathroom, which was 3 floors up from the living room. I ran up there alone and took it off, and out of the corner of my eye I saw something, and I could feel it too. It was peeking in the doorway at me and it made my stomach twist up. I quickly darted my eyes to whatever it was, and it disappeared, and I ran so fucking fast down the stairs and started demanding who was messing with me. They all looked at me terrified, asking what I was talking about, and realised that I was just making shit up and forgot about it. For 3 years after that, I felt completely normal. I also had gotten a new room at my dad's and had no more sleep paralysis. One night I had a super weird dream though. In the dream, I was me but in a different life, and I was constantly being followed by something telling me to hurt myself. In the dream, I ended up killing myself and I ended up in the stars. This astrological figure told me I didn't need to fear anything, that I'd be going into the next life with protection, and I was suddenly brought into the life I'm living. The dream showed events I'd lived and brought me back to the moment where I saw that thing in my friend's house. The moment stopped in slow motion and turned to the thing in the doorway, and something whispered, "It's trying to come back," in this terrifying voice. And then I woke up. I ran to my mom and told about the dream. I also never remember dreams as vividly as I remembered this one. And she told me that my past life is exactly what the hippie doctor had told her when he kicked me out of the room. We both just stared at each other, and I was confused on why my subconscious had let me access that. It's been over a year now since I had that dream, but ever since I had it, I've been having really weird encounters. I'm scared it's going to come back. This was 2009 or 10, and I'd lived in a house for several years with my wife and 2 dogs. I don't know much about the previous owners, but they had lived in the house since it was built in 2005. Several times I had seen what appeared to be a dog, small, black and quick, disappear around the corner, sometimes in dim light and sometimes during the day with the windows providing plenty of light. I told my wife, and she said she had similar experiences. One evening, sitting on the couch with the dogs reading, I heard the distinctive trot 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 of a dog coming down the hall from the bedrooms. Of course, the dogs were with me on the couch, and when I looked towards the sound, there was nothing there. The same thing happened a few weeks later when my wife was also in the room. I heard it first and said, "Do you hear that?" She said, "What, the dog coming to see us?" Then she noticed that both the dogs were again on the couch. The craziest part happened a few months after we started noticing things. We were asleep in the main bedroom with the door closed. The dog slept in the bedroom with us, the little one on the bed and the big one on the floor. We had just dozed off, and we were awakened by a distinctive and disturbing sound. The dog was getting ready to throw up. As any pet owner knows, you usually get 4 or 5 dry heaves as a warning to get the dog off the carpet. We both identified the sound as coming from the hallway, and I sprang into action. Finding nothing on the other side of the door, I looked for the dogs in the bedroom. As before, they were both fast asleep. We spent the next 20 minutes talking about it, then went back to sleep. That was the last we ever saw or heard of our little visitor.